Hi everyone, Angel here, and I started on a baby quilt today for a friend of mine who's having a great granddaughter, and I just wanted to show you some stuff. Now I'm not actually going to be showing you how to make the pattern exactly for this quilt, because the quilt itself is, I took out of a book and I'm making it as a present, so that's okay. And it was an Alex Alexander book, and so I'm not going to actually be showing you the pattern itself, but I am going to show you some techniques and stuff that you might or might not know on making this quilt. Now, the first thing the pattern calls for is some very small 2.5 inch and 3 inch blocks. So what we're going to do, it doesn't need many because we use many colors. So what we're going to do here is, this is one of the colors that we're going to be taking the 2.5 inch, 3 inch strips out of. I actually ironed this piece earlier and got it all blocked out and ready to cut, but as you can see, it's not even. So the first thing we're going to do, and you might notice this is my telephone thing. If you took the tour of the studio, the workroom with me, you'll notice that I have this handle that has stickies on it, suction cups. I like to put that on my bigger ruler because it's easier for me to hold it down with instead of having it slip. It's very nice to have, and I think it's worth its weight in gold actually. Now, one of the things that I like to do is, when I have a nice clean edge at the top, I will actually, and I know my edge, is clean, I'll actually line my ruler up here. A lot of people have done this. Some people don't do this and they just start cutting. They eyeball the edge and they start cutting on it. And what happens is that you're actually cutting, you're not cutting on the line of the fabric, you're sort of cutting in a slightly biased, and your strips are then not true straight. And they'll stretch on you, not to mention they'll be curvy, and when there's a fold there'll be a little V in the fold, and you don't want that, because you'll be throwing away a block, and then when you go to sew the blocks into your quilt, they'll stretch. So we want to make sure that we're cutting straight. So the first thing you do is you line up your quilt. I'm going to move this down so the camera can see this. I've got this folded properly. I made sure that it folded nice and straight on the line, and so it's not at all curving or at all pulling in any way. And unfortunately, sometimes when you have a piece of fabric cut, especially if you have it cut at a discount store or at a large fabric outlet, they don't always cut it correctly. A lot of times if you buy your fabric at a quilting store, they will cut it with a rotary blade, and they will make sure that the pieces are perfectly matched when they cut them. As you can see here, as you see, this edge is very small here and it gets bigger. No one took any consideration to the grain of the fabric when this piece was cut. So even though I had the 1/8 yard cut here, I don't think I've got a whole 1/8 yard of fabric, which luckily I overestimated in my pattern, so I should be enough. So see, what I did is I got a nice straight line with this ruler. Then I put this ruler against butted it up against my straight line. I'm holding this ruler in place. And then with my rotary cutter, I'm going to take a nice firm cut here, throw this piece away, and now I have a straight edge that's on the grain of the fabric to cut from. So I need a 2.5 inch strip. So now I can line my 2.5 inches this way and my straight edge that way, and I know that I have a nice square straight strip. You know, when you're cutting strips, you don't have to worry if you're a tiny bit off. Sometimes, especially when I first started cutting, I would sometimes get to about this point and my ruler would slide a little bit, and my cut would be a little bit off, and I would run out and buy new fabric. And you know what I found is that unless you go way off like this, If you go a little bit off, if you're eighth off, or you know, an eighth off at the end, a 16th off at the end, as long as you're in that seam allowance, when you get to the machine, you usually can fix it. Or you might find that most patterns give you more than you need. So let's say I went off, say 1/4 of an inch up here. So by the time I got to the end of this strip here, I had cut off an extra 1/4 of an inch, like over here. Let me move this down so you can see it better. And let's say that I actually nipped off a 1/4 of an inch over here. If I'm cutting this strip into squares, and the pattern gives me enough strips, tells me to cut, say, 5 strips, but 5 strips will make 60 squares. Let's just figuring. But I only actually am going to use 45 squares or 55 squares in my pattern. That gives me room to really kind of not use this piece, this actual little piece here, when I'm doing my squares. And a lot of patterns will do that. So don't panic if you make a little mistake. Often you can either make it up when you're sewing, so when I know that I'm going to be using this part of the strip and I'm cut a little bit here, a little bit less than I should have, I can sew a little bit closer to the edge to make up for what I overcut. Or maybe I won't need to use that part. So don't panic and run out and buy new fabric right away. You might not need it. So just check your pattern and see if you're alright before you go and make a mistake buying more fabric than you need. Of course, everyone is buying more fabric than they need. I know that I do it, but of course that's because we love our fabric. And as my husband likes to call me, a material girl, in the truest sense that I'm always buying material. So now we line up our 3 inches, and I cut my 3-inch strip. Here's my 3-inch strip. Easy enough. You might be asking why I don't use my Go Cutter for this 2-inch, 2.5 inch and 3-inch strip, since I have the template for them, or the die for them. And the reason for that is simple, because I'm only cutting 1 strip of each. And there's no point getting out the die and doing all that work with the Go Cutter just for the 1 strip. So now I have my other pieces. These have all been pre-washed and pre-ironed and all that. Sometimes I don't pre-wash fabric. Sometimes it doesn't matter. You can tell what fabric, I think usually you can tell which fabrics are going to run and which ones aren't. A lot of times pinks and reds run, so I will pre-wash them. Sometimes I don't bother. Now in this case, I'm layering these two together, just to give you an idea of what you can do. These two are pretty much cut exactly the same. And you can sort of see that I got these at a different place. They are much more cut on grain. And you can see that even when I put the ruler on them. You can see that they're much, much more even. But still, there's a tiny little difference. So I am going to straighten them up, just like I did with the other ones. All 4 layers. See, I saw that I made sure that I cut at a point where all 4 layers were present. Slide it over, 1, 2.5, catch my 2.5, and I know many of you that are watching this, if you're still watching this, are saying to yourself, wow, this is very basic rotary cutting, and it really is, but it's good to know the basics. Everyone does the basics a little different too. I know many quilters who like to do the basics different. A lot of them like to start cutting their fabric on the other side and then flip it over, meaning they straighten out the other side first, because they don't like to use the ruler technique that I just did. They do it differently. This goes in the stash. I never throw anything out that we can use again. So there's our fabrics that we need for the inside.